A young family set out for a peaceful camping trip on Labor Day weekend. By the next morning, their picnic was still untouched, their baby's diaper bag lay abandoned, and their dog sat tied to a tree, waiting for a family that would never return. No screams. No struggle. No signs of what happened. For 7 long months, the forest held its secrets, until a gold prospector stumbled upon something hidden in a cave that would shock even the most seasoned investigators. What happened to the Sens? Who could commit such a brutal, calculated act? Before we dive deeper into this chilling story, I want to hear from you. What do you think really happened to this family? Drop your theories in the comments below and stick around because the truth behind the disappearance is more terrifying than you can imagine. Make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any part of this haunting mystery. It was a warm, golden morning near Copper, Oregon. Labor Day weekend of 1974, a time meant for laughter, family, and the simple joy of camping in the woods, began like any other for the Sen family. Richard, Belinda, their lively 5-year-old David, baby Melissa, and their scruffy little terrier had arrived the day before, setting up their tent among the towering pines and babbling creeks of the Sisu Mountains. But by the next morning something was terribly wrong. The campsite looked untouched. Too perfect. The milk was still on the picnic table, condensation clinging to the carton as if someone had just set it down. The diaper bag, packed with meticulous care for baby Melissa, lay abandoned on the ground. Richard's wallet and wristwatch were left in the truck. Belinda's purse remained on the seat. Their dog, usually barking at passers-by, sat quietly, tilting its head as if confused, waiting for its family to return. No signs of struggle. No overturned chairs. No footprints leading away from the campsite. No broken branches. No blood. It was as if the family had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind a silent, eerie tableau of normalcy. By the time Belinda's mother arrived, expecting to see her daughter and grandchildren on their way home for dinner, a creeping unease had settled over the forest. She called out, but there was no response. Her heart pounded as she approached the picnic table, seeing familiar items lying undisturbed as if frozen in time. The realization struck her like ice. They were gone. Police were called, and what followed became one of the largest search operations in Oregon history. Helicopters scanned the dense forest from above. Bloodhounds were brought in, noses pressed to the ground, trying to pick up the trail of the missing family. Divers scoured nearby rivers. Volunteers, scouts, and even the National Guard combed the trails, calling out names into the stillness of the forest. Yet no matter how far or how carefully they searched, nothing was found. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Rumors spread like wildfire. Had the family been kidnapped? Had a wild animal attacked them? Could they have run off voluntarily? None of it made sense. The Sens were beloved in their community, ordinary people with no enemies and no reason to disappear. And yet, the forest held its secrets tightly. It swallowed the answers, leaving behind only whispers, uneasy glances, and a sense that something unspeakably dark had occurred. The Sens' disappearance was no accident, no random tragedy. It was a mystery that would haunt Oregon for decades. Somewhere, deep in the wilderness, hidden from prying eyes, the truth waited. Silent. Patient. Waiting for the day it would finally reveal itself. Richard Sen, 28, was the kind of man who thrived on routine and responsibility. Each morning began before sunrise, loading his logging truck with care. Each evening ended with him returning home exhausted but fulfilled. Hard work defined him, but it also grounded him. To those around him, Richard was dependable, trustworthy, a man who rarely drew attention, but whose absence would ripple through the community like a sudden, cold wind. Belinda Sen, 22, was the quiet heartbeat of their home. She moved through life with calm assurance, tending to her children and household with unwavering devotion. Her days were filled with the small, intimate acts of love, preparing David's breakfast with care, rocking baby Melissa to sleep, double-checking every list, every plan. Belinda had created a sanctuary for her family, a home where safety and warmth outweighed luxury, and love was their greatest possession. Their children were the joy and innocence of the household. David, only 5, brimmed with curiosity, forever darting ahead to explore the forest trails, asking questions about the world as though he could unravel its mysteries before his 5th birthday. Melissa, just 5 months old, had a quiet, observant presence. Her wide eyes took in everything: the sway of the trees, the sunlight on the creek, the comforting voice of her mother. Even their dog, a small scruffy terrier, seemed attuned to the rhythm of their lives, always near, always protective. Weekends were sacred for the Sens. Their favorite escape was Carberry Creek, a secluded stretch of the Sisu Mountains. Here the air was sharp and fresh, the trees tall and quiet, the creek crystal clear. Here the world slowed. Here laughter and love were uninterrupted by the chaos beyond the forest. Richard would fish, David would skip stones, Belinda would cradle Melissa beneath the pine canopy. It was a small, perfect routine. Labor Day weekend of 1974 seemed no different. The family loaded their 1956 Ford pickup with fishing gear, snacks, diapers, and toys. Smiles were exchanged with neighbors, promises made to return by Sunday evening. Everything about the day was ordinary, calm, safe. And that ordinary, predictable normalcy is what makes what happened next all the more terrifying. Because by Monday morning, when the sunlight spilled across the campsite, everything that had been ordinary had disappeared. The milk sat half-poured, forgotten. The diaper bag lay untouched. Richard's wallet and wristwatch were still in the truck. Belinda's purse remained where she had left it. Their dog, loyal and confused, sat waiting for a family that would never return. No signs of struggle. No footprints leading away. No broken branches. No blood. The forest was silent, almost mocking in its stillness. And somewhere in that silence a question hung like a shadow. Where had the Sens gone? Belinda's mother, arriving to check on the family, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The campsite was too quiet, too orderly. A gut-wrenching sense of dread began to take hold. She called their names, her voice trembling, but there was no response. Every glance around the empty clearing seemed to confirm the impossible truth. The Sens had vanished. Police would soon descend, launching one of Oregon's largest search operations. Helicopters scanned the dense forest, bloodhounds sniffed every trail, divers combed the creeks. But no trace of the family was ever found. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and yet the forest refused to give up its secret. Whispers grew in the nearby towns. Had they been kidnapped? Taken by a wild animal? Was it a deliberate disappearance? Every theory was more chilling than the last, yet none offered answers. The truth, hidden deep within the wilderness, waited patiently, silently, like a predator in the shadows. And then came the chilling, inevitable thought that no one dared voice aloud. This was no accident. Something dark, calculated, and deliberate had happened here. But the forest held its secrets tightly. And 7 months later, a discovery would shatter everything, revealing horrors no one could have imagined, and no one could have prepared for. It was the morning of September 1, 1974, a bright, crisp Labor Day in Oregon. The Tsin family loaded their 1956 Ford pickup and set off for Carberry Creek, their favorite camping spot in the Sisu Mountains. The forest was alive with sunlight filtering through the pines, the faint murmur of the creek in the distance, and the occasional chirp of birds overhead. To the casual observer, it was a perfect day for a family outing. Richard, in his usual careful way, checked the supplies: fishing poles, ice for the cooler, diapers and snacks for David. Belinda ensured Melissa was secure in her carrier, humming softly as she placed the baby in the back seat. David bounced with excitement, pointing out every tree and rock along the roadside. Even their dog seemed unusually alert, sniffing the air as if sensing the calm before a storm. When they arrived at the campsite, it was idyllic, just as it had been countless times before. The family unloaded the truck, pitched the tent, and set up chairs around a small campfire. Richard walked down to the creek to test his fishing line. David followed, skipping stones along the bank. Belinda unpacked a picnic lunch, arranging sandwiches and milk with care. Everything was normal. Too normal. Around 9 a.m., Richard decided to take a short drive to a nearby general store to pick up a few last-minute supplies. Belinda stayed behind, keeping an eye on the children as they played near the creek. The dog wandered a few feet away but never strayed far. The sun climbed higher in the sky, shadows stretching across the campsite. It was during this quiet stretch, with the forest humming softly around them, that the first eerie detail went unnoticed: the feeling of being watched. Small, almost imperceptible, like a shadow flitting between trees. A branch snapping somewhere behind the tent. A fleeting rustle in the underbrush. Nothing tangible, nothing that would raise alarm. Yet the atmosphere shifted subtly as if the forest itself had grown still, holding its breath. Richard returned less than an hour later. The family waved, laughed, and carried on with the day. By midday, lunch was packed away, and the children ran along the creek's edge. Everything seemed as ordinary as ever. But as the sun began to dip, a strange tension settled over the campsite. It was Belinda's mother who would later describe her first sense of dread when she arrived at the site later that evening. She had expected the usual scene. The family laughing, David throwing pebbles into the creek, Melissa cradled in her mother's arms. But instead she found nothing. The campsite was eerily still. The truck was parked neatly, items left inside. Belinda's purse sat on the seat. The diaper bag lay on the ground, untouched. The milk carton mid-pour had gone cold. The sandwiches sat where they had been placed, as if the family had simply vanished into thin air. Even the dog, tethered to a tree, seemed to understand something was wrong, whining softly, pacing in small circles. Her calls went unanswered. He checked the creek, the tent, the surrounding trees. No footprints. No signs of struggle. No broken branches. The forest swallowed her shouts, giving back only silence. By the time the authorities arrived, the horror of the scene became clear. The campsite had been left perfectly intact, as if the family had been frozen in time. No clues, no trace, no explanation. It was the kind of disappearance that made rational minds falter. An ordinary family vanishing from a familiar place without a single witness, a single scream. Days turned into weeks, and the forest seemed to mock every search. Helicopters scoured the tree canopy. Bloodhounds sniffed every trail. Divers combed the creeks. Volunteers scoured every foot of land. Yet nothing. No trace of the Sens anywhere. And then came the whispers, glimpses of strangers in the area. A trio, a man, a woman, and another man, seen near the campsite around 5 p.m. on that fateful day. They lingered, watching, waiting, yet no one knew who they were. Just shadows passing through the peaceful woods, their presence unsettling enough to etch unease into the minds of those who spotted them. The forest had become a trap, a puzzle, and the answers lay hidden, waiting. Waiting for someone to stumble upon a truth that no one could imagine. 7 months had passed since the Tsin family vanished, and every day without answers weighed heavily on the community. The search parties, volunteers, and law enforcement had combed every inch of Carberry Creek and the surrounding forest, yet the family had vanished as if swallowed by the earth itself. It was April 12, 1975, when 2 teenage gold prospectors from Forest Grove, Oregon, decided to explore a remote hillside near the creek. They were no strangers to the forest's rugged trails, but that morning, something in the air felt off. The forest was eerily quiet. The usual chorus of birds and rustling leaves was absent, replaced by a heavy, almost suffocating silence. As they carefully navigated the steep terrain, one of the boys froze. A dark shape leaned against a tree. At first he thought it was just a fallen log. But then the unmistakable outline of a human body became visible. It was an adult male, bound and left against a tree. The body was partially decomposed, the skin mottled by months in the damp forest, but the grim reality was unmistakable. The boy's stomach churned. Something horrific had happened here. Then something caught the other boy's eye, the mouth of a small cave hidden behind a thicket of trees. Hesitant, their fear battling curiosity, they approached. Inside, their worst nightmares were realized. The cave held more bodies. A woman, a young child, and a baby, all placed with deliberate care. The scene was grotesque, a haunting display of cruelty meant to hide the victims from the world. Their identities were unknown to the boys in that moment, but the horror was immediate and raw. The boys ran without a word, alerting local authorities. Law enforcement arrived quickly, cautiously moving through the cave. The discovery confirmed the unthinkable. These were the remains of the Tsin family: Richard, Belinda, 5-year-old David, and 5-month-old Melissa. The autopsies revealed a nightmare beyond imagination. Richard and Belinda had been executed with precise .22 caliber gunshots. David suffered the same fate. Melissa, an infant, had endured severe head trauma. Signs indicated that the family had not been killed immediately after disappearing. They had been held captive, suffering for weeks before their deaths. The cave itself deepened the mystery. Hidden nearly 7 miles from their campsite, tucked in a remote section of the forest, it was nearly impossible to locate unless someone knew the terrain intimately. The deliberate placement of the bodies suggested planning, precision, and cold intent. This was no random attack. Then came a chilling realization. A local volunteer had searched this exact cave months earlier. At that time it had been empty. This meant one of two terrifying possibilities. The killer moved the bodies after the initial search, or the family had been held elsewhere before being brought to the cave. Either scenario implied a perpetrator who was calculating, patient, and intimately familiar with the forest. Adding to the unease were reports of a strange trio near the Tsin family's campsite on the day they disappeared. A man, a woman, and another man, behaving oddly and lingering too long. Were they innocent campers? Or part of the dark plan that had led to the family's disappearance? The investigators now faced a daunting puzzle. A family abducted, transported miles into the forest and killed with chilling precision, yet no clear trail led to the killer. Each answer uncovered only more questions, painting a picture of cruelty and cunning that terrified even seasoned detectives. And then, a new lead emerged. One that would point to someone with a violent history and a connection to the area. A man whose past crimes were shocking enough to make the hair stand on end, and whose presence in the forest during Labor Day weekend could explain the unthinkable. But just as the investigation was gaining momentum, something happened that would shake the case to its core. The trail led to a man whose name would haunt the Tsin family forever, Dwaine Lee Little. Yet before authorities could fully confront him, the case would take another dark turn, revealing a secret even more sinister than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation into the Tsin family's disappearance unfolded, all eyes began to turn toward one man, Dwaine Lee Little, a local resident with a history as dark and twisted as the forests surrounding Carberry Creek. By 1974, Little was 25 years old and had recently been released from prison, where he had served time for the rape and murder of a teenager, Orla Faye Phipps, in 1964. To the police, he was the kind of man who could not be ignored. A known predator familiar with violence and now living near the very area where the Tsin family had vanished. Reports placed him in the vicinity of the Tsin family's campsite during Labor Day weekend. Witnesses recalled seeing a man who fit Little's description, moving along the forest trails, lingering suspiciously near the area, and acting in a manner that unsettled those who glimpsed him. Yet, despite these unnerving accounts, investigators could not immediately link him to the crime. No fingerprints, no weapon, no concrete evidence tied him directly to the disappearance. As the months turned into years, more unsettling details surfaced. Little had a reputation for sudden bursts of violence and a chilling lack of remorse. In 1980, he attacked Margie Hunter, a pregnant woman, after offering her a ride near Portland. The assault left Hunter with serious injuries and her unborn child at risk. Little was arrested, sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms, and the community's fears about his potential involvement in other violent acts intensified. But what made Little especially sinister in the minds of the investigators wasn't just his past, it was the pattern of opportunity and proximity. Witnesses placed him in the area around the Tsin disappearance. Locals reported strange sightings, and a miner who owned a cabin near the campground recalled that Little and his parents had signed his guest book on the Monday following Labor Day. The timing could not be ignored. Was this a coincidence? Or was it the subtle footprint of a predator hiding in plain sight? Even more chilling was a claim from an inmate named Rusty Kelly, who had shared a cell with Little. According to Kelly, Little confessed to murdering the Tsin family while behind bars. Though unverified, the statement added another dark shadow to the already grim narrative. If true, it suggested a man capable not just of impulsive violence, but of cold, calculated murder, planning an abduction and execution with terrifying precision. Investigators noted the meticulous nature of the crime scene itself. The Tsin family had been taken without any sign of struggle, leaving behind a campsite that was eerily normal, as if nothing had happened. Their bodies were hidden deep in a remote cave, miles from the campsite, a location suggesting intimate knowledge of the terrain. Little had previously lived near these woods and was familiar with their hidden trails, crevices, and secluded spots. It was a chilling combination. A violent man with motive, opportunity, and knowledge of the area. Yet, despite mounting suspicion, there was no proof that could withstand a courtroom, no smoking gun to hold him accountable. The Tsin family's disappearance remained shrouded in shadows, leaving investigators frustrated and communities whispering about what really happened. The questions that haunted the case were endless. How did Little, or anyone, manage to abduct a family of 4, transport them miles into the wilderness and leave no trace? How could the family have been kept alive then executed without anyone noticing? Was he acting alone, or had someone else been complicit in this horrifying act? Even the smallest details added to the unease. Locals described seeing a trio of suspicious people near the campground on the day of the disappearance. A man, a woman, and another man. Could Little have been part of this group? Was he orchestrating something far larger than anyone realized? The more investigators uncovered about Little, the more it became clear that this was not a random act of violence. It was a planned, deliberate, and chillingly methodical crime. The forests of Oregon held their secrets close, and Little appeared to be one of the few who knew exactly how to navigate those shadows, and perhaps, exactly what to do when no one was watching. Yet despite all the circumstantial evidence, the Tsin family's fate remained unsolved, and the chilling realization settled over the investigation team. Someone out there still knew the truth, and that person had vanished into the same woods that had swallowed the Tsin family. The case was far from closed. Every lead seemed to spiral into more questions. Every clue pointed to one terrifying possibility, that Dwaine Lee Little, or someone like him, remained untouchable, hidden by the vast wilderness that had become both a grave and a secret keeper. And just when it seemed the case could not grow any darker, a new tip emerged. A witness who claimed to have seen something in the woods months after the disappearance, something that could finally crack open the mystery and bring the Tsin family's story to light. But would the authorities be able to follow this lead before the forest swallowed the truth forever? Months had passed since the chilling discovery of the Tsin family's bodies. The forest, serene and silent during the day, seemed almost alive with secrets at night. Every search, every interview had led only to dead ends, and the investigators were left with a gnawing sense that the truth was hidden in plain sight, masked by the dense Oregon wilderness. Then a breakthrough came in the most unexpected way. A local hunter came forward with a story that sent shivers down the spines of law enforcement. He described how, months after the disappearance, while trekking near Carberry Creek, he noticed disturbances in the forest that no animal could have caused. The hunter's account was unsettling. Faint footprints appeared along a rarely used trail, footprints that suggested the careful, deliberate passage of people who knew the terrain intimately. Scratches and marks on trees and rocks indicated that something, or someone, had been guiding a path through the forest, almost like a map carved into the wilderness itself. The air, he said, felt different, heavy and tense, as if the forest itself were holding its breath, aware that someone had committed an unspeakable act within its depths. Investigators immediately saw the significance. The Tsin family had vanished from a campsite they knew intimately, their favorite spot, their safe haven. Yet here was evidence of another presence in the woods. Someone who had been watching, waiting, and possibly manipulating the environment to their advantage. The hunter recalled seeing a fleeting shadow near the treeline, a movement so brief it could have been a trick of the light, but he knew what he saw. Something had been there, lurking, observing. Perhaps it was the killer, or maybe an accomplice, someone who had walked the same trail as the Tsin family, unseen and silent. Then came the discovery that would send the investigation into overdrive. Hidden beneath layers of moss and leaf litter, the hunter stumbled upon small, disturbing remnants of human presence. A tiny baby shoe, weathered and torn. A partially burned photograph, charred along the edges, showing a family that could have been the Tsins, or perhaps someone else entirely. Fragments of a hand-drawn map, with markings that hinted at secret pathways and concealed locations. The implications were staggering. Whoever had committed these acts had not only planned meticulously but had also monitored the search efforts and moved evidence to mislead authorities. This was no random act. This was carefully orchestrated terror, designed to baffle even the most seasoned investigators. The authorities realized a terrifying possibility. The Tsin family may have been held captive for weeks before their deaths, transported silently into the deep woods where no one would find them. And the cave where the bodies were discovered was only one part of a network of hiding places, suggesting the killer was intimately familiar with the terrain, someone who could navigate it blindfolded, unseen, unheard. Adding to the tension was the witness's chilling observation. Among the trees he saw a figure familiar from town, someone known for violent tendencies. Could this person have been Dwaine Lee Little, recently released from prison and suspected of unspeakable crimes? Or was it someone else, equally dangerous, hiding in plain sight? Investigators were now forced to consider a darker truth. The killer had not only executed the Tsin family with horrifying precision but had also played a psychological game with the authorities, moving bodies, leaving misleading traces, and watching the search efforts unfold. Whoever they were calculating, methodical, and possibly still at large, blending into the community, waiting for another opportunity. The discovery of these hidden items reignited the case, but it also cast a shadow of fear over the forest. The once peaceful trails, the quiet creek, and the sun-dappled woods now seemed like a labyrinth of secrets, concealing someone capable of unimaginable cruelty. Every clue, every observation was like a piece of a puzzle that refused to fit. Investigators were left chasing shadows, unsure if they were following evidence or the manipulations of a mind far more cunning than their own. And then came the most haunting question. If the killer had hidden evidence so carefully, could there be other secrets yet undiscovered, perhaps still lying somewhere in the wilderness, waiting for someone to stumble upon them? The forest, silent and brooding, seemed to taunt the authorities. The answers were there, but only the brave, or the foolhardy, would uncover them. The forest seemed to close in around the investigators as they returned to the site of the hidden items. Every crackle of leaves underfoot sounded louder, every rustle of branches sharper, as if the woods were watching, waiting. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck rise. Detectives carefully photographed the tiny baby shoe, the burned photograph, and the fragments of the hand-drawn map. Each item felt like a message from the killer, a taunt meant to mock their inability to solve the case. Whoever had done this had not only planned the murders but had also anticipated the search, anticipating every step authorities might take. Lieutenant Kazar studied the map fragments with a grim expression. The markings suggested more hidden spots, places where someone could conceal bodies, evidence, or even themselves. It was as if the killer had mapped the forest like a chessboard, leaving pawns, decoys, and traps for anyone daring enough to enter. The hunter who had discovered the items shivered as he recounted what he had seen that day. He described a figure slipping between the trees, watching from a distance, vanishing before he could get a clear look. The shape was familiar enough to trigger a shiver of recognition. Someone known in the community, someone who had no business being out there alone. Authorities were left with a chilling thought. The killer was still out there, moving freely among the trees, observing, waiting, and manipulating the evidence. The forest that had once been a peaceful escape for the Tsin family was now a labyrinth of terror, hiding the secrets of a man, or men, capable of unimaginable cruelty. The team split into two groups to follow the trail suggested by the map fragments. Every step was careful, methodical, but with each meter deeper into the forest, the sense of being watched intensified. Shadows shifted unnaturally. Branches creaked, but the wind was still. For a moment, it felt as though the forest itself were alive, guarding the secrets of the Tsin family. Then, near a steep embankment partially obscured by moss and vines, one of the officers spotted fresh disturbances in the soil, marks that weren't there during earlier searches. His pulse quickened. Could it be another hiding spot? Or worse, had the killer returned recently, revisiting the scene? The team paused, their flashlights cutting through the gloom, and for a moment, the forest held its breath. Then came the faintest sound, a metallic clink like a key dropped or a lock closing somewhere nearby. Everyone froze. The sound didn't echo naturally. It seemed deliberate, calculated, as if someone wanted them to hear it, but not see them. Lieutenant Kazar whispered, This isn't over. Whoever did this isn't just hiding in the past, they're still here. Watching us. A gust of wind rustled the trees, carrying an almost imperceptible whisper of movement from deep within the shadows. The team exchanged nervous glances, each realizing the terrifying truth. The killer knew the terrain better than anyone. They could strike, vanish, and remain invisible. And then, as the forest seemed to tighten around them, one officer noticed a faint trail of recently disturbed soil leading toward a narrow, hidden ravine, just beyond their sight. A place where sunlight barely touched, where someone could hide entirely. The realization hit like ice. The Tsin family's fate was just the beginning. Somewhere in these woods, more secrets lay buried, and finding them could bring the investigators closer to a truth far darker than they were prepared to face. The wind whispered again, carrying a haunting question. Who else had walked these trails? And what else had they taken with them? Lieutenant Khazar's voice was barely audible yet firm. We follow this trail. But tread carefully, because the forest has eyes, and it's not letting go of its secrets easily. The investigators stepped forward, flashlights cutting through the gloom, shadows stretching like fingers, and as they approached the ravine, the camera of the mind, or the imagination of anyone following the story, pauses. The darkness ahead hides answers, or perhaps even more horrors, waiting to be uncovered. The ravine loomed ahead like a yawning mouth in the forest, shadows pooling at its base. The investigators moved cautiously, flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness, every step crunching on the layer of leaves and dirt that seemed to conceal more than just soil. Lieutenant Khazar signaled the team to spread out, moving slowly, scanning for any clue that could explain the Tsin family's disappearance, or perhaps reveal something even more sinister. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp moss and decaying leaves, and for a moment, the forest felt alive, almost sentient, like it was watching their every move. Near the edge of the ravine, one officer froze. Half buried in the loose earth, a piece of fabric caught on a jagged rock. He bent down, carefully pulling it free. It was small, delicate, unmistakably part of a child's clothing. The recognition hit like a thunderclap. This could have belonged to David or baby Melissa. Khazar approached, examining the soil around the fabric. The ground had been disturbed recently, with faint impressions that suggested someone, or something, had been dragged down into the shadows. The ravine was narrow and steep, hidden from any casual passerby. Whoever had done this had known exactly how to conceal their movements. The team descended slowly, using ropes to brace themselves against the treacherous incline. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, and the dim light from their flashlights struggled against the darkness. It wasn't long before they found a small, concealed alcove, almost entirely hidden by overhanging vines. Inside, their flashlights revealed a disturbing scene. Old, weathered remnants of camp supplies, blankets, a partially rotted basket, even what looked like a tattered doll, were scattered as though left behind in haste. The items seemed to whisper of a life interrupted, stolen, and hidden. Then in the far corner something caught Khazar's eye, a deep indentation in the earth, carefully covered with leaves and branches. He knelt down, brushing them aside. Beneath the natural camouflage was a hollow space just big enough for a human body. "Get the forensic team," Khazar ordered, his voice low, tense. This isn't just evidence. It's a hiding place." As they waited, one of the younger officers noticed scratches along the walls of the ravine, marks that suggested a struggle, a desperate attempt to climb or escape. The reality sank in slowly, chilling them to the bone. Someone had been trapped here, fighting to survive, before being buried in the shadows of the forest. Suddenly, a sharp clatter echoed from above. Every officer froze. A branch snapped underfoot, or had it been intentional? The forest seemed to thrum with hidden life, every rustle and shadow a potential threat. Khazar's voice cut through the tension. "Stay alert. Whoever did this might still be nearby. They know these woods better than we do. Every move we make, they've planned for it." The team exchanged nervous glances, realizing that this case was far from over. The Tsin family's tragic end might only be the tip of the iceberg. Somewhere in the forest, secrets older and darker than anyone could imagine were waiting to be uncovered. And then, just as they prepared to investigate the hollow space, one officer called out, his voice trembling. "Lieutenant, you need to see this." Khazar rushed over, heart pounding. What lay in the shadows of the alcove would change everything they thought they knew about the Tsin family disappearance, and point to a killer far more cunning than they could have ever imagined. Khazar crouched beside the hollow, his flashlight trembling slightly as the shadows danced across the walls. The smell hit first, a pungent, almost metallic tang that made his stomach turn. But it was the sight that froze him. Inside the hollow were fragments of what had once been a family's life, but twisted, distorted by time and concealment. A torn blanket, splintered wood, and a small chewed-up teddy bear, its fur matted and stained. Then, buried beneath the debris, something hard and unmistakable jutted out from the earth. Khazar carefully dug around it, revealing the shape of a human skull. The realization struck like lightning. The alcove wasn't just a hiding place for supplies. It was a grave. The forensic team arrived, working quickly but meticulously, lifting the remains with a solemn reverence. As layers of dirt and debris were removed, the horrifying truth became clear. These were the missing family members. Richard, Belinda, David, and little Melissa. The very lives the town had mourned in whispers for months had been here, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered. But it wasn't just the location that sent chills through everyone present. It was the manner of their concealment. The bodies were arranged in a way that suggested deliberate staging, almost as if someone had wanted them to be found, eventually, but only after months of suspense and terror. Khazar examined the surrounding area. The hollow's entrance was cleverly camouflaged by fallen branches and leaves. Whoever had done this knew the forest intimately, moving silently through its depths, hiding their crimes with precision that made professional investigators shiver. "Look at this," one officer whispered, pointing to a series of small markings along the walls. Deep, shallow scratches too precise to be random. "It's like whoever dragged them here marked their path." The lieutenant's mind raced. Every clue, every shadow, every hidden corner of this ravine spoke of planning, calculation, and cold intent. Whoever had taken the scents had gone to great lengths to erase themselves, leaving nothing but whispers and terror behind. Then Khazar noticed something that made his blood run cold. A small, partially torn piece of paper tucked under a rock near the hollow. He picked it up carefully, examining it under his flashlight. Scrawled hastily across it was a series of numbers and letters, indecipherable at first glance, but unmistakably deliberate. This isn't just a note," Khazar murmured. "It's a signature. Or a map." Before anyone could react further, a rustling came from the forest above, sharp and deliberate, not the random creak of wind or wildlife. Every officer froze, weapons raised. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, as if watching, waiting for the next move. Then from somewhere deep in the shadows, a low, deliberate laugh echoed, sending shivers down every spine. Khazar gritted his teeth. "Someone's here," he said, voice hard. "And they've been waiting for us." The team looked at each other, unease settling like a fog. The case that had haunted Oregon for decades was far from over. The Tsin family's disappearance had led them here, but what, or who, was still out there watching, waiting to make the next move? The forest seemed to close in around the investigators. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of wind through the branches made hearts race. Khazar held the note in his gloved hand, eyes scanning the dense woods. The scrawled letters and numbers were puzzling, a message from the past or a taunt from someone still out there. The officers fanned out cautiously, flashlights cutting through the darkening trees. The low, deliberate laugh from earlier echoed again, sending a chill down their spines. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a warning. Someone had been here, someone who knew the search teams would eventually find the hollow. Then a sharp sound, a branch snapping, came from behind a cluster of firs. Every officer froze. Khazar whispered, "Stay sharp. Don't let them get ahead of us." They moved slowly, almost silently, toward the sound. And then they saw it, footprints in the mud. Not animal tracks, human. Recent, deliberate, leading deeper into the forest. The prints were partially hidden by leaves, but Khazar's experience told him they weren't old. Whoever had left them had been watching the hollow, waiting for someone to stumble onto the scene. Suddenly, Officer Erickson called out, "Over here." They gathered around him and saw something partially buried beneath leaves, a small leather pouch. Inside were several items. A rusty key, a faded photograph of the Tsin family, and a torn piece of clothing that looked suspiciously like Belinda's blouse. Khazar's jaw tightened. Whoever had done this hadn't just hidden the family, they had left clues, almost like a puzzle, daring someone to follow it. But why? And what were they trying to communicate? A sudden movement in the trees made them spin. Shadows shifted unnaturally. The team's flashlights caught the glint of eyes watching them from above, then nothing. Just the wind again. Or so it seemed. "Someone knows we're here," Khazar said, voice low but steady. "And they're not going to let this end without them being part of it." The pieces were coming together, but the picture was far from clear. The Tsin family's disappearance, the careful concealment of their bodies, and now these deliberate taunts. Everything pointed to a killer who was smart, patient, and terrifyingly close. Then from deep within the forest, a faint whistling sound, slow, mocking, deliberate, cut through the air. It was close and yet impossible to pinpoint. The officers instinctively moved toward it, flashlights sweeping the area, hearts pounding. And then Khazar saw it. A flicker of movement just beyond a fallen log. Something, or someone, was there watching, waiting to see what they would do next. The tension was unbearable. Every instinct screamed at Khazar to call for backup, to retreat. But something primal told him to push forward, follow the trail, find the truth. And then he whispered to himself, almost inaudibly. After all these years, it's finally time to see who did this. The deeper investigators dug, the more one name kept circling back to them. Dwaine Lee Little. Little wasn't just anyone. He had a reputation that preceded him. A history of violence and cruelty that chilled even hardened detectives. Years before the Tsin family vanished, Little had been convicted of assaulting and killing a teenage girl. Though young at the time, the brutality of his crime had marked him as dangerous. He was sentenced but eventually released on parole. And that parole placed him in the exact area where the Tsin family disappeared. The discovery of the Sen's remains and the strange belongings hidden in the woods made investigators look closer at Little's movements. Witnesses had reported seeing him near the campsite that Labor Day weekend. Others claimed he was wandering the area in the weeks that followed. The footprints, the staged belongings, the eerie taunts in the forest, all seemed to point toward someone who knew how to inflict terror, not just violence. But what chilled investigators most was how the details aligned with Little's past behavior. His crimes had always been methodical, calculated, and he had a way of manipulating people into a false sense of safety before striking. The Sens had been a trusting, happy family, with no reason to suspect that their final camping trip would intersect with a predator's path. Khazar and his team dug deeper into Little's parole records. The timeline was damning. He had been released only months before the Tsin family disappeared, and his residence was disturbingly close to where their campsite was located. The forest wasn't just random wilderness to him, it was a hunting ground. Yet there was still no direct evidence tying him to the murders. No fingerprints, no blood, nothing that could stand up in court. It was as if Little had orchestrated the crime with such precision that he left investigators chasing shadows. Still, the pattern was undeniable. The careful concealment of the Sen's remains, the eerie trail of belongings, and the psychological games that seemed woven into the investigation. They all bore the marks of someone who wanted not only to kill but to control the narrative of the crime. Khazar was certain. This wasn't random. The Tsin family hadn't simply crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong time. They had been targeted by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Little had the capability, the history, and the proximity. But just as investigators felt they were closing in, something happened that unsettled the entire case. Another local came forward with a disturbing claim. One that suggested that Tsin family might not have been Little's only victims, and that the forest might be hiding even more secrets than anyone dared to imagine. As the details surrounding the Cowden family murders unraveled, one man remained at the center of suspicion: Dwaine Lee Little. Witnesses reported unsettling encounters. A local family camping in the same area recalled seeing Little near the Cowden's site that very weekend. Another camper mentioned spotting his truck on the winding forest roads not far from where the Cowdens had vanished. And when investigators revisited Little's background, the coincidences were almost too much to ignore. Years earlier, Little had brutally murdered a young girl named Orla Fancher. The crime was so savage that even seasoned detectives never forgot it. After serving time, he was released on parole, shockingly early for such a crime, and drifted back into rural Oregon. When the Cowdens disappeared, Little was free, living not far from the Siskiyou Mountains. The timing fit too perfectly. His presence in the area matched witness reports. And his past proved he was capable of unimaginable violence. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. Despite endless interviews, forensic tests, and countless hours of investigation, no physical evidence tied Little directly to the Cowdens' deaths. The campsite had been too exposed, the remains too long hidden in the wilderness before discovery. Nature itself had erased the very proof investigators desperately needed. Still, the behavior of Little and his family after the murders only deepened suspicions. His parents were said to have protected him fiercely, providing shaky alibis and refusing to cooperate fully with police. Some investigators believed the Littles knew more than they let on, perhaps even helping to shield him from the consequences of what he'd done. The frustration was unbearable. Detectives felt certain they knew who had slaughtered the Cowden family. They could almost see the crime playing out: the ambush, the forced march into the woods, the cold-blooded killings. But in court, certainty without proof means nothing. And so, while Dwaine Lee Little remained under a cloud of suspicion for the rest of his life, the case against him never moved forward. The Cowden family murders remained technically unsolved, a wound that still haunts southern Oregon to this day. But just when it seemed the case had gone cold forever, Little would resurface in the years to come, linked to more violence, more blood, and more shattered lives. And for investigators, it was a grim confirmation of what they had always believed: the monster who destroyed the Cowdens had never truly stopped. For the Cowden family, what began as a joyful Labor Day outing in 1974 ended as one of Oregon's darkest mysteries. Their remains, discovered months later, told of a tragedy so brutal that even seasoned investigators struggled to speak of it without emotion. Yet despite decades of suspicion, no one was ever convicted. The name that hung over the case like a shadow was always Dwaine Lee Little. His violent history, his presence near the campsite, and the eerie way the crime mirrored his earlier brutality left little doubt in the minds of detectives. To them, the Cowdens weren't victims of chance. They had crossed paths with a predator, a man who should never have been free. And Little's later years only confirmed that fear. He continued a life marked by violence. Years after the Cowden murders, he was once again arrested, this time for assaulting a woman. She survived, barely, but the attack echoed the same patterns: control, cruelty, and bloodshed. Each new crime felt like another grim reminder of what the Cowdens likely endured in their final hours. Yet because no direct evidence linked him to the 1974 murders, the case was left open. The Cowden family's deaths remain to this day unsolved, a scar on the landscape of southern Oregon and a chilling warning of how justice can sometimes fall short. To the public, the story became more than just another tragedy. It was a reminder of how fragile life is, how a family could disappear in broad daylight, in a place meant for laughter and peace, only to leave behind questions that will never be answered. The Cowden campsite was eventually reclaimed by the forest. Today it looks almost ordinary: sunlight filtering through tall pines, the sound of water nearby. But those who know the story say the woods never feel the same. The silence there is heavy, as though the trees themselves remember what happened. And maybe that's why the Cowden family's story still grips us after all these years. Because it isn't just about a family who vanished, or a man who may have gotten away with murder. It's about the unsettling truth that sometimes monsters hide in plain sight, and sometimes the forest never gives up all of its secrets. This was the story of the Cowden family. The Cowden family's story leaves us with more questions than answers. A family wiped out in the span of a single weekend, a suspect who seemed to fit the crime perfectly, and yet, no justice ever brought to their names. Do you believe Dwaine Lee Little was the man responsible? Or could someone else have been hiding in those woods that day? Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you found this story chilling, don't forget to subscribe to Untold Stories by Selene, where we uncover the mysteries that history tried to bury. And if you'd like to help keep these stories alive, share this video with someone who thinks the past is always safe. Because sometimes the past is darker than we dare to imagine.